Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today we have two guests. Got Melissa Lavasani from Psychedelic Medicine Coalition. We got Jay Kopelman from Mission Within Foundation. We're going to talk about Ibogaine policy, and a recent set of meetings in Washington, D.C., and all sorts of other things, I'm sure. But thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah. Melissa, I want to have you jump in first. Could you tell us a little bit about your work and what you do at PMC?
Yeah, so Psychedelic Medicine Coalition is the only Washington, D.C.-based advocacy organization dedicated to advancing the issue of psychedelics and making sure the federal government has the education they need and understands the issue inside out so that they can generate good policy around psychedelic medicines. We host Hill events. We host other convenings. Our big event every year is the Federal Summit on Psychedelic Medicine. That's going to be May 14th this year, where we talk about kind of the pressing issues that need to be talked about with government officials in the room so that we can incrementally move this forward. Our presence here in Washington, D.C. is really critical for this issue's success because when we're talking about psychedelic medicines, from the federal government perspective, they are the ones that are going to initiate the policies that create a healthcare system that can properly facilitate these medicines and make sure patient safety is a priority and there's guardrails on this. And it's really important that we have a home base for this issue in Washington, D.C., just because this is very complicated, as a lot of your viewers probably understand. And, it can get lost in the mix of all the other issues that lawmakers in D.C. are focused on right now. And we need to keep that consistent presence here so that this continues to be a priority for members of Congress.
I love this. And Jay, can you tell us a bit about yourself and Mission Within Foundation?
Yeah, sure, Joe. Thanks. I am the CEO of Mission Within Foundation. Prior to this, most of my adult life was spent in the military as a Marine, and I came to this role after having a psychedelic-assisted therapy experience myself at the Mission Within down in Mexico, which is where pretty much we all go. We are here to help provide access for veterans and first responders to be able to attend psychedelic-assisted therapy retreats to treat issues like mild TBI, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, sometimes addiction at a very low level. And so we've been doing this for a little more than a year now and have provided 250 plus scholarships to veterans and first responders to be able to access these retreats and these life-saving medicines. We're also partnered, you may or may not know, with Melissa at Psychedelic Medicine Coalition to help advance education and policy, specifically the Innovative Therapy Centers of Excellence Act that Melissa has worked for a number of years on now to bring to both houses of Congress.
Thank you for that. So let's chat a little bit about what this event was that just went down. What was it, 2 weeks ago at this point?
Yeah. It's called For Veterans Society and Us All. There's a lot of dialogue on Capitol Hill about veterans healthcare and psychedelics, but where I've been frustrated is that, it was just a lot of talk about what the problems are and not a lot of talk about like how we actually propel things forward. So at that event, I thought it was really important. And we had 3 members of Congress there. Morgan Luttrell, who has been a champion from day one in his time in Congress, having gone through the experience himself at Mission Within. And then the 2 chairs of the Psychedelic Caucus, Lou Correa and Jack Bergman. And we really got down to the nitty gritty of like why this has taken so long, and what is actually happening right now, what are the possibilities, and what the roadblocks are. And I thought it was a great conversation. We had an interesting kind of dynamic with Luttrell, is like very passionate about this issue in particular. I think it was really a great event. And 2 days later, Jack Bergman introduced his new bill for the VA. So it was kind of like the precursor to that bill getting introduced, and we're just excited for more and more conversations about how the government can gently guide this issue to success.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I was a little bummed I couldn't make it, but next time I hope. But I've heard a lot of good things, and it sounded like there were some really important messages in terms of like feedback from legislators. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when Representative Luttrell was speaking, he really impressed on us a couple things. First is that they really kind of need the advocates to coordinate, collaborate, and come up with like a strategic plan. Without public education, talking to members of Congress about this issue is really difficult. Like PMC is just one organization. We're very little. Mission Within, very little. We're all like kind of new and navigating this not so new issue, but new to Washington, D.C. issue. Without that public education as a baseline, you have to spend a lot of time educating members of Congress. That's like one of our things is, we don't want to tell Congress what direction to go to. We want to provide them the information so they understand it very intimately and know how to navigate through things. And secondly, he got pretty frank with us and said, we've got one chance at this issue. And it's like, that's kind of been like my talking point since I started PMC, is like, you have a very limited window when these kind of issues pop up and they're new and they're fresh, and you have a lot of the veteran community coming out and talking about it, and there's a lot of energy there. But now is the time to really move forward with some real legislation that can be impactful. But we've got to be careful. We forget, I think sometimes those of us who are in the ecosystem forget that our level of knowledge about these medicines, and a lot of us have firsthand experience with these drugs and our own healing journeys, is we forget that there is a public out there that doesn't have the level of knowledge that we all have. And we got to make sure that we're sticking to the right elements of what needs to happen. We need to be sure that our talking points are on track and we're not getting sideways about anything and going down roads that we don't need to talk about. It's why, PMC is very focused on moving forward veteran legislation right now, not because we're a veteran organization, but because we see this long-term policy track here. We know where we want to get to, and watching other healthcare issues kind of come up and then go through the VA healthcare system, I think it's a really unique opportunity to utilize the VA as this closed system, the biggest healthcare system in the country, to evaluate how psychedelics operate within systems like that. And, before they get into other healthcare systems, like, what do we need to fix? What do we need to pay attention to? What's something that we're paying too much attention to that doesn't necessarily need that much attention? So it's a real opportunity to look at psychedelic medicines within a healthcare system and obviously continue to gather the data. Bergman's bill, expanding veteran access to emerging treatments, not only mandates the research, it gives the VA authority for this, for running trials and creating programs around psychedelic medicines, but also one of the great things about it, I think, is it provides an on-ramp for veterans that don't necessarily qualify for clinical trials. I think that's one of the biggest criticisms of clinical trials is like you're creating a vacuum for people, and people don't live in a vacuum. So we don't necessarily know what psychedelics are going to look like in real life. But with this expanding veteran access bill that Bergman introduced, it provides the VA an opportunity to provide this access under in a safe container with medical supervision while collecting data, while ensuring that the veteran that is going through this process has the support systems that it needs. So, I think that there's a really unique opportunity here. And like Latrell said, like we've got one shot at this. We have people's attention in Congress. Now's the time to start acting, and let's be really considerate and thoughtful about what we're doing with it.
Thanks for that, Melissa. And Jay, anything to add there on kind of your takeaways from this last visit in DC?
Yeah, I think that Melissa highlighted it really well, and there were a couple other things that I think you could kind of tie it all together with some other issues that we face in this country, and that Representative Correa brought up as well. But one of the things I wanted to go back and say is that veterans have kind of led this movement already, right? So it's a good jumping off point, right? That it's something people from both sides of the aisle, from any community in America, can get behind. If you think about it, in World War II, we had 1 million people serving. Our population was like not even 200 million. But now we have a population of 330 million. And at any given time, there might be 1 million people in uniform, including the Reserve and the National Guard. So it's an easy thing to get behind this small part of the population that is willing to sign that contract where you are saying, yeah, I'm going to defend my country, possibly at the risk of my own life. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that the VA, being a closed health system, and they don't have shareholders to answer to. They can take some risks. They can be innovative and be forward thinking in the ways that some other healthcare systems can't. And so they have a perfect opportunity to show that they truly care for their veterans, which I'm not saying they don't, but this would be an opportunity to show that care at a whole different level. It would allow them to innovate and be a leader in something, as our friend Jim Hancock will say. When he went to the Naval Academy, they had the world's best shipbuilding program. Why doesn't the VA have the world's best care program for things like TBI and PTSD, which affects 40 something percent of all veterans, right? So there's an opportunity here for the VA to lead from the front. These medicines provide reasonably lasting care, where it's kind of a one and done, whereas with the current systems, and again, not to denigrate the VA in any way, they're doing the best job they can with the tools in their toolbox, right? But maybe it's time for a trip to Home Depot. Let's get some new tools and have some new ways of fixing what's broken, which is really the way of doing things. It's not, veterans aren't broken. We are who we are. But it's a way to fix what isn't working. So I think that, given there's tremendous veteran homelessness still, addiction issues, all these things that do translate to the population at large are things that can be worked on in this one system, the VA, that can then be shown to have efficacy, have good data, have good outcomes, and take it to the population at large.
Hmm. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that. And so there was another thing I wanted to pivot to, which is some of the recent press. So we've seen a little bit of press around some, um, in one instance, some bad behavior in Mexico that AFI put out, Americans for Ibogaine put out. And then in another case, there was a recent fatality. And I think both are tragic. Like we shouldn't be having to deal with this at this point. But there's a lot of things that got us here. It's not necessarily the operator's fault entirely, or even at all, honestly. Like some medical interventions just carry a lot of risk. Like think about like how risky bypass surgery was in the 90s, right? Like people were dying a lot from medical interventions. And this is a major intervention, Ibogaine, and also a lot of promise to help people quite a bit. But as of right now, there's risk, and part of that risk, in my opinion, comes from the inability of organizations to necessarily collaborate. Like there's no kind of convening body sitting in the middle, allowing for and facilitating really good data sharing and learnings. And I don't necessarily see an organization stepping up and being um, the convener for that kind of work. I've heard rumors that something's going to happen there, and I'm hopeful. I'll always want to share my opinion on that, but yeah, I don't know, Jay. From your perspective, is there anything you want to kind of speak to about these two recent incidents that Americans for Ibogaine kind of publicized recently?
Yeah, so I'll echo your sentiment, of course, that these are tragic incidents. Um, and I think that at least in the case of the death at Ambio has done a very good job of talking about it, right? They've been very honest with the information that they have. And like you said, there are risks inherent to these medicines. And it's like anything else in medicine, there are going to be risks. When I went through uh, when I went through chemo, there are risks. You don't feel well, you get sick, um, and it there are processes in place to counter that when it happens, and there are processes and procedures and safety protocols in place when caring for somebody going through an Ibogaine journey. When I did it, we had EKG, echocardiogram. You're on a heart monitor the entire time. They push magnesium via IV. You have to provide a urinalysis sample to make sure that there is nothing in your system that is going to potentially harm you during the Ibogaine. They have a cardiologist who is monitoring the heart monitors throughout the Ibogaine experience. So the safety protocols are there. I think it's just a matter of standardizing them across all providers, right? Like that would be a good thing if people would talk to one another. Um, I as in any system, right? You've got to have some collaboration. You've got to have standardization. So they're not called standard operating procedures for nothing. That means that in a given environment, everybody does things the same way. It's true in Navy and Marine Corps, Air Force, Army aviation. They have standard operating procedures for every single aircraft. So if you fly, let's say, the F-35 now, right? Because it's flown by the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force. The emergency procedures in that airplane are standardized across all three services. So you should have the same, or, you know, within a couple of different words, the same procedures and processes across all the providers, right? Like maybe in one document, you're going to change happy to glad and small dog to puppy, but it's still pretty much the same thing. And as a service that provides scholarships to people to go access these medicines and go to these retreats, you know, my criteria is that this provider has to be safe. Number one, safety is paramount. It's always got to be very safe. It has to be effective. And, you know, once you have those two things in place, then I have a comfort level saying, okay, yeah, we'll work with this provider. But until those standardized processes are in place, you'll probably see these one-off things. I mean, some providers have been doing this longer than others and have really figured out, you know, they've cracked the code. And, you know, sharing that across the spectrum would be good. But just when these things happen, having a clearinghouse, right, where everybody can come together and talk about it. You know, like once the facts are known, because to my knowledge, we still don't know all the facts. Like, as you know, as horrible as this is, you still have to talk about, like, has an autopsy been performed? What was found in the patient's system? You know, there are things there that we don't know. So we need to know that before we can start saying, okay, well, this is how we can fix that, because we just don't know. And, you know, to their credit, you know, Ambio has always been safe to the best of my knowledge. You know, I haven't been to Ambio myself, but people that I have worked with have been there. They have observed, they have seen the process. They believe it's safe, and I trust their opinion because they've seen it elsewhere as well. So, yeah, having that one place where we can all come together when this happens, it's almost like it should be mandatory. Like in the military, when there's a training accident, we would have to have what's called a safety stand down. And you don't do that again for a little while until you figure out, okay, how are we going to mitigate that happening again? Believe me, you can go overboard, and we don't want to do that. Like, we don't want to just stop all care, but maybe stop detox for a week and then come back to it.
Yeah. A dream would be, let's get like the, I don't know, 10, 20 most popular or well-known operators together somewhere and just do like a 3-day debrief. Hey, everybody, like, here's what we see. Let's work on this together. You know, how normal medicine works. And it's hard because this is not necessarily something people feel safe about in America talking about, because it's illicit here. I don't understand necessarily how the operations relate to each other in Mexico, but I think that's something to, like, the public should dig into. Like, what is this? And I'll start digging into that. I asked a question recently of somebody, like, is there some sort of like back channel signal everybody's using? And there's no clear yes. You know, I think it would be good, but that's just a start. You know, that's like, okay, we can actually kind of say hi and watch out for this to each other.
It's not like we don't all know one another, right?
Yes.
Like, at least 3 operators were represented at the Aspen Ibogaine meeting. So, like, that could be, and I think there was a panel kind of loosely related to this during Aspen Ibogaine meeting, but it, you know, have a breakout where the operators can go sit down and kind of compare notes.
Right. Yeah. Melissa, do you have any comments on this thread here? And I put you on mute if you didn't see that.
All right, I'm off mute. Yeah, I think that Jay's hits the nail on the head with the collaboration thing. I think that it's just a problem across the entire ecosystem, and I think that's just a product of us being a relatively new and upcoming field. It's a product of, our fundraising community is really small, so organizations feel like they are competing for the same dollars, even though their goals are all the same. They have different functions. I think with time, I mean, let's be honest, like if we don't start collaborating and the federal government's moving forward, the federal government's going to coordinate for us. And that might not necessarily be a bad thing, but we understand this issue to a whole other level that the federal government doesn't. And they're not required to understand it deeply. They just need to know how to really move forward with it the proper way. But I think that it's really essential that we all have this come together moment here so we can avoid things. I mean, no one's going to die from bad advocacy. So like I have a bit of an easier job, but it can absolutely stall efforts to move things forward in Washington, D.C. when one group is saying one thing, another group is saying another thing. Like we're not quite at a point yet where we can have multiple lines of conversation and multiple things moving forward. For PMC, it's like, just let's get the first thing across the finish line. And we think that is veteran healthcare. And I know there's plenty of other groups out there that want the same thing. So, the reason why I put on the federal summit last year was I kind of hit my breaking point with the lack of collaboration. And I wanted to just bring everyone in the same room and say like, all right, here are the things that we need to talk about. And I think the goal for this year is to bring people in the same room and say, we scratched the surface last year, and this is where we need to really put our efforts into, and this is where the opportunities are. I think that's going to show the federal government, if we can organize ourselves, that they need to take this issue really seriously. I don't think we've done a great job at that thus far, but I think there's still plenty of time for us to get it together. And I'm hoping with these two VA bills that are in the House right now, and Senate is putting together their version of these two bills so that they can move in tandem with each other. I think that, there's an opportunity here for us to show the federal government as an ecosystem, hey, we are so much further ahead, and this is what we've organized, and here's how we can help you. That would make them buy into this issue a bit more and potentially move things forward faster. At this point in time, I think that, psychedelics aren't necessarily the taboo thing that they used to be, but there's certainly places that need attention. There's certainly conversations that need to be had. And like I said, like PMC is just one organization that can do this. We can certainly organize and drive forward collaboration, but we alone cannot cover all this ground, and we need the subject matter experts to collaborate with us so we can, once we get in the door, we want to bring the experts in to talk to these officials about it. So I really want listeners to really think about us as a convener of sorts when it comes to federal policy. And, I think when, like, for example, in the early 80s, a lot of people have made comparisons to the issue of psychedelics to the issue of AIDS research, and how you have a subject matter that's like extremely taboo and a patient population that the government quite honestly didn't really care about in the early 80s. But what they did as an ecosystem is really organize themselves, get very clear on what they wanted the federal government to do. And within a matter of a couple of years, AIDS research funding was a thing that was happening. And what that did was that ripple effect turned that into basically finding new therapies for something that we thought was a death sentence before. So I think we just need to look at things in the past that have been really successful, and try to take the lessons from all of these issues and move forward with psychedelics.
Love that. And yes, we always need to be figuring out efficient approaches, and where it has been successful in the past is often an opportunity to mimic and potentially improve on that.
Yeah.
One thing I think it's important to add to this part of the conversation is that, Melissa pointed out there are a number of organizations that are essentially doing the same thing. Um, I like to think we do things a little bit differently at Mission Within Foundation, and that we don't target any one specific type of service member. We work with all veterans, we work with first responders, but what that leads to is that there are, as far as I've seen, nothing but good intentioned people in this space. People who really care about their patient population, they care about healing, they are trying to do a good job, and more importantly, they're trying to do good, right? That I think they all see the benefit down the road that this has, pardon me, not just for veterans, but for society as a whole. And ultimately, that's where I would like to see this go. I would love to see the VA take up this mantle and run with it and provide great data, great outcomes. We are doing some data collection ourselves at Mission Within Foundation, albeit anecdotal based on surveys given before and after retreats. But we're also working with Greg Fonzo down at UT Austin on a brain study he's doing that will have 40 patients in it when it's all said and done. And I think we have 2 more guys to put through that, and then we'll hit the 40. So there's a lot of good here that's being done by some really, really good people who've been doing this for a long time and want nothing more than to see this come full circle so that we can take care of many, many, many people. Like I say, I want to work myself out of a job here. I would love to see this happen, and then I don't have to send guys to Mexico to do this. They can go to their local VA and get the care that they need. But one thing that I don't think we've touched on yet, or regarding that, is that the VA isn't designed for that. So it's going to be a pretty big lift to get the right types of providers into the VA with the knowledge, right? With the institutional knowledge of how this should be done, what is safe, what is effective. And then it's not just providing these medicines to people and sending them home, right? You don't just do that. You've got to have the right therapists on the back end who can provide the integration coaching to the folks who are receiving these medicines. And I'm not just talking Ibogaine. Even with MDMA and psilocybin, you should have a proper period of integration that helps you to understand how this is going to affect you, what the experience really meant. Because it's very difficult sometimes to just interpret it on your own as to what the experience was and what it meant to you. And so it will take some time to spin all that up, but once it's in place, the sky's the limit, I think.
I'm kind of curious, Jay, about what's going on with Ibogaine at the federal level. Is there anything at VA right now?
At the VA, no, not with Ibogaine. And we send people specifically for Ibogaine and 5-MeO, right? And so that doesn't preclude my interest in seeing this legislation passed, right? Because it will start with something like MDMA or psilocybin, but ultimately it could grow to Ibogaine, right? Think about the cost savings at the VA, even with psilocybin, right? Where you could potentially treat somebody with a very inexpensive dose of psilocybin or Ibogaine one time, and then you don't have to treat them again. Now, if I were a VA therapist who's not trained in psychedelic trauma therapy, I might be worried about job security. But it's like with anything, right? Like ultimately it will open pathways for new people to get that training, or the existing people to get that training and stay on and do that work, which only adds another arrow to their quiver as far as I'm concerned, because this is coming and we're going to need the people. It's just like AI, right? Like AI, yeah, some people are going to lose some jobs initially, and that's unfortunate, but productivity ultimately across all industries will increase and new jobs will be created as a result of that. I mean, I was watching Squawk Box one morning. They were talking about the AI revolution and how there's going to be a need for 500,000 electricians to build these systems that are going to work with the AI supercomputers. And so
Mhm.
where an opportunity may be lost, I think several more can be gained going forward.
And just to add on what Jay just said, there's nothing specific going on with Ibogaine at the VA, but I think this administration is taking a real look at addiction in particular. They just launched a new initiative that's really centered on addiction treatment. It's called the Great American Recovery. And they're dedicating $100 million towards treating addiction as like a chronic treatable disease and not necessarily a law enforcement issue. So in that initiative, there will be federal grant programs for prevention and treatment and recovery. And while this isn't just for psychedelic medicines, I think it's a really great opportunity for the discussion of psychedelics to get elevated to the White House. There's also, previous to this announcement last week from the White House, there's been $100 million that was dedicated at ARPA-H, which is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Healthcare. And that is kind of an agency that's really focused on forward-looking treatments and technologies for a whole slew of issues, but this $100 million is dedicated to mental health and addiction. So there's a lot of opportunity there as well. So while I think, some people are talking about, we need a executive order on Ibogaine. It's like, well, the president is thinking about, what issues can land with his voting bloc. And I think I don't think we necessarily need a specific executive order on Ibogaine to call this a success. It's like, let's look at what's just been announced from the White House. They're all in on thinking creatively and finding new solutions for this. And this aligns with HHS Secretary's Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s goals when he took on this role of health secretary. Addiction has been a discussion that he has a personal tie to from his own experience, and I think when this administration started, there was so much like fervor around the dialogue of like everyone's talking about psychedelics. It was Secretary Kennedy, it was Secretary Collins at the VA, it was FDA Commissioner Marty McCarry, and I think that there's like a lot of undue frustration within folks because you don't necessarily snap your fingers and change happens in Washington, D.C. This is not the city for that. It's intentionally designed to move slow so that we can avoid really big mistakes. I think we're a year into this administration, and these two announcements are pretty huge considering that there are known people within Domestic Policy Council that aren't necessarily supportive of psychedelic medicine. So there's a really amazing progress here, and as frustrating as it might be to just be waiting for this administration to make some major move, I think they are making major moves. Like for Washington, D.C., these are major moves, and we just got to figure out how we can take these initiatives and apply them to the issue of psychedelic medicines.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, it is interesting, like the amount of fervor there was at the beginning. We had kind of one of my old lawyers, Matt Zorn, jumped in with the administration,
Right.
and it was really cool to see and hopeful how much energy was going on. It's been a little quiet, kind of
Yeah.
feels like a black box a little bit, but there
Well,
was.
that's on me. Maybe we need to be more out in public about like what's actually happening, because I feel like day in and day out, it's just been, you got to just like have that constant beat with the government, and it's not the photo ops on the Hill. It's the conversations that you have. It's the dinner parties you go to. It's the fundraisers you attend. That's why I kind of have to like toot my own horn with PMCs. Like, we need to be present here at not only on the Hill, not only at the White House, but kind of in the ecosystem of Washington, D.C. itself. There are like power players here. There are people that are connected that can get things done. Like last week we had a big snowstorm. I walked over to my friend's house to have like a little fire sesh with them and our kids, and his next door neighbor came over. He was a member of Congress. I talked about the VA bills. Like, we're reaching out to his office now to get them up to speed and hopefully get their co-sponsorship for the 2 VA bills. So, I mean, the little conversations you have here are just as important as the big ones with the photo ops. So it's really like, building up that momentum and finding that time where you can really strike and make something happen.
Yeah. Jay, anything to add there?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think the fervor is still there, right? But real life happens.
Yes.
And gets in the way, right? So
yeah,
I can't imagine how many issues Secretary Kennedy has every day, much less the president. Like, there's so many things that they are dealing with on a daily basis, right? We just have to work to be the squeaky wheel in the right way, right? With the right information at the right time. Like, just inundating one of these organizations with noise, it just becomes noise, right? It doesn't help. So when we have things to say that are meaningful and impactful, we do, and Melissa does an amazing job of that. But it takes time. We're not. This is like turning an aircraft carrier, not a ski boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's understandably frustrating, I think, for the public and the psychedelic public in particular, because we see all this hope. We continue to get frustrated at politics. It's nothing new, right? And we want to see more people get well immediately. And I kind of, Jay, from the veteran perspective, I do love the kind of loud voices. Like, you're making me go to Mexico for this. I did that, and you're making me leave the country for the thing that's going to fix me. Like, no way. And barely a recognition that this is a valid treatment, that is complicated given how medicine is structured here domestically, but it's also, let's face the facts, like, the drug war kind of prevented us from being able to do this research in the first place, thanks Nixon. And like, how do we actually kind of correct course and say, like, we need to spend appropriately on science here so we can heal our own people, including veterans and everybody. Really, it's a dire situation out there.
Yeah, it really is. We were talking briefly about addicts, right? And it's not sexy. People think of addicts as people who are weak-minded, right? They don't have any self-control. But look at the opioid crisis, right? That Brian Hubbard was fighting against in Kentucky for all those years. That was something that was given to the patient by a doctor that they then became dependent on. And a lot of people died from that. And so, I don't think it's fair to just put all addicts in a box, just like it's not fair to put all veterans in a box, just like it's not fair for doctors to put all their patients in a box. We're individuals. We have individual needs. Our health is very individual. Like I don't think I should be put in the same box as every other 66-year-old that my doctor sees. It's not fair. You know, if you took my high school classmates and put us all in a photo, we're all going to have different needs, right? Like some look like they're 76, not 66. Some look like they're 56, not like they're. We do things differently. We live our lives differently. And the same is true of addicts. They come to addiction from different places. Not everybody decides they want to just try heroin at a party and all of a sudden they're addicted. It happens in different ways, you know, and the whole fentanyl thing has been so daggum nefarious, right? You know, pushing fentanyl into marijuana. Somebody's smoking a joint and all of a sudden they're addicted to fentanyl or they die.
I think we're having a.
It's just not fair to say everybody in this pot is the same or everybody in this one is the same. We have to look at it differently.
Yeah, I like to zoom one level out and kind of talk about just how hurt we are as a country, as a world, really, but as a country specifically, and how many people are out of work for so many difficult reasons and away from their families for so many kind of tragic reasons. And if we can get people back to their families and back to work, a lot of these things start to self-correct. But we have to like have those interventions where we can heal folks and get them back. And you know, everything from trauma in childhood, you know, adulthood, combat, whatever it is, like these things can put people on the sidelines. And Jay, to your point, like you get knee surgery and all of a sudden you're, you know, 2 years later, you're on the hunt for fentanyl daily. You know, that's tough. It's really tough. Carl Hart does a good job talking about this kind of addiction pipeline, and a few others do as well. But it's just, you know, kind of putting it in a moral failure bucket. It's not great. I was chatting with somebody about veterans. It's like you come back and you're like, what's going to make me feel okay right now? And it's not always alcohol. Like this is the first thing that made me feel okay, because there's not great treatments and there's a lot of improvements in this kind of like bringing people back from the field that needs to happen, in my opinion. It seems to be shared by a lot of people, but yeah, it's Ibogaine is going to be great. It's going to be really important. I really can't wait for it to be at scale appropriately, but there's a lot of other things we need to fix too, so that we can just, you know, not have so many people we need to, you know, spend so much money healing. You know,
yeah, you know, we don't need the president to sign an executive order to automatically legalize Ibogaine, right? But it would be nice if he would reschedule it so that then researchers could do this research on a larger scale. You know, we could now get some real data that would show the efficacy, and it could be done in a safe environment, you know, and so that
do you have any kind of figures? Like I've been talking about this for a while, Jay. Like, does it drop the cost a lot of doing research when we deschedule things?
I would imagine so, because it'll drop the cost of accessing the medicines that are being researched, right? You would have buy-in from more organizations. You know, you might even have a pharma company that comes into this. You know, look at J&J with ketamine, right? They have a nasal spray version of ketamine that's doing very well. I mean, it's probably their biggest revenue provider for them right now. And so, you know, it would certainly help. And I think it would lower costs of research to have something rescheduled rather than being Schedule 1. You know, people are afraid to take chances when you're talking about Schedule 1.
Or they just
You need
don't have the
special
money
labs.
to research things that are on Schedule 1 because there's so much an incredible amount of red tape that you have to go through, and
Yeah.
your
Mhm.
facility has to be a certain way, and how you contain those medicines
Oh,
that you are
yeah.
researching has to be in a specific container, and it's just very cumbersome to research Schedule 1 drugs. So absolutely, the cost would go down.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Less safes.
yeah,
Less
yes, yes.
Right.
locks. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be really interesting when that happens. I'm gonna hold out faith that we can see some movement here. Because yeah, like why make healing more expensive than it needs to be? I think
Right.
like that's potentially a protectionist move. Like I'm not here yet, but look at AbbVie's acquisition of the Gilgamesh IP. Like that's a really interesting move. I think it was $1.2 billion. So they're going to want to protect that investment. And it's likely going to be an approved medication. Like I don't see a world in which it's not an approved medication. You know, I don't know a timeline. I would say
Yeah.
less than 6 years, just given how much cash they've got. But who knows? Like I haven't followed it too closely. So, and that's an Ibogaine derivative, to be clear, everybody. If you're not in the loop on that, which is hopeful, you know, but I don't know what the efficacy is going to be with that compared to Ibogaine. And then we have to talk about the kind of proprietary molecule stuff. There's like a whole bunch of things that are going to go on here. And this is one of the reasons why I'm excited about federal involvement, because we might actually be able to have some sort of centralized manufacturer, or at least the VA could license 3 or 4 generic manufacturers for instance. And that way prices aren't going to be, you know, $8,000 a dose or whatever, you know. That's
Well, I think it's a very exciting time in the space. You know, I think that there's the opportunity for innovation. There is the opportunity for collaboration. There's the opportunity for, you know, long-term healing at a very low cost. You know, that we have the highest healthcare cost per capita in the world right here in the US. And yet we are not the number one health system in the world. So to me, that doesn't add up. So we need to figure out a way to start bringing costs down for a lot of people, and at the same time increasing outcomes.
absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of possible outcome improvements here, and you know, everything from relapse rates. Like we hear often about people leaving a clinic and they go and overdose when they get home. Tragically too common. I think there's everything from, you know, I'm involved in an organization called the Psychedelics and Pain Association. We look at chronic pain very seriously, and Ibogaine is something we are really interested in. And if we could have better, you know, research there, better outcome measures there, you know, perhaps we can have less people on opioids to begin with from chronic pain conditions.
Yeah, I might be
lovely.
due for another Ibogaine journey then, because I deal with chronic pain from jujitsu. But
Oh gosh,
some
let's
people
talk
would
later.
That's self-inflicted.
some people would say take a month off, but
Yeah.
I'm not that smart.
Yeah. But you know, this this whole thing is going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. I'm endlessly hopeful because I'm still here, right? I've been at this for almost 10 years now, very publicly, and I think we are seeing a lot of movement. It's not always what we actually want to see, but it is movement nonetheless. You know, how many people are writing on this now than there were before? You know, we have people in New York Times writing somewhat regularly about psychedelics, and even international media is covering it. What do we have? Legalization in Australia somewhat recently for psilocybin and MDMA. Czech Republic, I think Germany made some moves recently. Really interesting to see how this is going to just keep shifting. And I think there's no way that we're not going to have prescription psychedelics in 3 years in the United States. It probably more like a year and a half. I don't know. Are you all taking odds?
Yeah, I mean, I think
I got to check Kalshi, see what they're saying.
I think it's safe to say, I mean, this could even come potentially the end of this year. I think definitely by the end of 2027, there's going to be at least one psychedelic that's FDA approved.
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're not
And
counting ketamine.
right.
I mean,
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense that it shouldn't be or wouldn't be, right? That
Right.
we've seen the benefits. We
Mhm.
know what they are. It's at a very low cost, but you have to keep in mind that these things, they need to be done with the right setting and container, right? And you've got to be able to provide that environment. So, but I would love, like I said, I'd love to work myself out of a job here and see this happen, not just for our veterans, but for everybody.
Mm. Um, so, Melissa, is there a way people can get involved or follow PMC, or how can they support your work at PMC?
Yeah, I mean, follow us on social media. Our two biggest platforms are LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm bringing my newsletter back because I'm realizing, there is a big gap in kind of like the knowledge of Washington, D.C., just in general, what's happening here. And I think, part of PMC's value is that we are plugged into conversations that are being had here in the city, and we do get a little insight. And I think that would really quiet a lot of, a lot of noise that exists in our ecosystem. If people just had some clarity on like what's actually happening here, and what are the opportunities, and where do we need more reinforcement, and also, as we're putting together a public education campaign, you know my like if I could get everything I wanted, like that campaign would be this like multi-stakeholder collaborative effort, right, where we're covering all the ground that we need to cover. We're talking to the patient groups, we're talking to traditional mental health organizations, we're talking to the medical community, we're talking to the general population. I think that's like another area that we just seem to be lacking some effort in. And ultimately, the veteran story is always super compelling. It pulls on your heartstrings. These are our heroes of our country. Like that is meaningful, but a lot of the veteran population is small, and we need the just basic American living in middle America, understanding what psychedelics are, so that in presenting to them the stories that they can relate to, because that's how you activate the public, and you get them to see what's happening in these clinical trials, what the data has been saying, what the opportunities are with psychedelics. And then they start calling their members of Congress and saying, hey, there is this bill sitting in Congress, and why haven't you signed on to it? And that political pressure, when used the right way, can be really powerful. So I think, now we're at this really amazing moment where we have a good amount of congressional offices that are familiar enough with psychedelics that they're willing to move on it. There's another larger group that is familiar with psychedelics and will assist and co-sponsor legislation. But there's still so many offices that we haven't been able to get to, just because like we don't have all the time in the world and all the manpower in the world to do it. But that is one avenue, is like the advocates can speak to the lawmakers, the experts speak to the lawmakers, and we want the public engaged in this. Ultimately, like that's like the best form of harm reduction, is having an informed public. So they're not seeing these media headlines of like, oh, this miracle cure that saved my family. It's like, yes, that can happen. Psychedelics, I mean, speaking personally, psychedelics did save my family. But what you miss out of that story is the incredible amount of work I put into myself and put into my mental health to this day, to maintain like myself, my own agency, and like be the parent that I want to be, and be the spouse that I want to be. So we need to continue to share these stories, and we need to continue to collaborate to get this message out, because we're all in the same boat right now. We all want the same things. We want patients to have safe and affordable access to psychedelic assisted care. And we're just in the beginning here. So sign up for our newsletter. We can sign up on our website, and then follow us on social media. And I anticipate more and more events happening with PMC, and hopefully we can scale up some of these events to be much more public facing as this issue grows. So I'm really excited about the future, and I've been enjoying this partnership with Mission Within. Jay is such a professional, and it really shows up when he needs to show up. And I look forward to more of that in the future.
Fantastic. And Jay, how can people follow along and support Mission Within Foundation?
Yeah, again, social media is going to be a good way to do that. So we are also pretty heavily engaged on LinkedIn and on Instagram. I do share a bit of my own stuff as well on social media. So we have social media pages for Mission Within Foundation, and we have a LinkedIn page for Mission Within Foundation. I have my own profiles on both of those as well, where people can follow along. One of the other things, that would probably help get more attention for this is if the general public was more aware of the numbers of professional athletes who are also now pursuing Ibogaine specifically to help treat their traumatic brain injuries and the chronic traumatic encephalopathy that they've suffered as a result of their time in professional sports or even college sports. And, people worship these athletes. And I think that if more of them, like Robert Gallery, were more outspoken about these treatments and the healing properties that they've provided them, that it would get even more attention. I think, though, what Melissa said, I don't want to parrot anything she just said because she said it perfectly, right? And I'd just be speaking to hear myself talk. But being collaborative the way that we are with PMC and with Melissa is, I think, the way to move the needle on this overall. And like she said, if she could get more groups involved in these discussions, it would do wonders for us.
Well, thank you both so much for your hard work out there. I always appreciate it when people are showing up and doing this important, sometimes boring and tedious, but nevertheless sometimes exciting work. And so yeah, just thank you both, and thank you both for showing up here to Psychedelics Today to join us, and I hope we can continue to support you all in the future.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure being with you today, and with Melissa, of course, always.
Appreciate the time and space.
Thanks.